Karen.
I'm a firm believer in the more you spend, the more you increase your own income.
Yeah.
So I keep spending more money, and then I keep telling myself I have to. Yeah. We had never stayed in a camper a single night and bought our camper, and we bought like the Mac Daddy. So
Oh, you guys are those people.
yeah, I'm that people.
I still like you, but we just can't hang out.
I understand.
I'm
Unless we're
bougie.
hanging out at your house, that'd be cool.
I'm like frugal bougie, if that makes sense. Like, I had to be in a
You're frugal.
He's
He's
bougie.
not. He's the bougie.
I see your husband is not frugal. Seem frugal to me.
No, he's not. I said, I'm the free spirit, or no, he's the free spirit. I'm the nerd, or whatever Dave Ramsey classified like that. We need to turn these blinds down. Is it
Probably.
glare pretty bad for y'all?
I like all windows.
Y'all got me all distracted with the pool now. Everyone's gonna be late for Zoom. It's okay.
Maybe that's what's-
I was here early and everything.
I was here 10. Same. I was here like 20 till 10. I was so proud of myself. I was like, I'm getting a good seat today.
And for those of you who are on Zoom, bear with me. I get it.
Is Brad coming again? Or you
No,
know
this
about this?
Yeah, this is going to be kind of like a more generic. His was very detail oriented. I want ours to be a little more industry specific. So it's a lot of what I wanted to get to last week, but we just didn't have time. I mean, it was great. We had such great questions, but I wanted to kind of talk through how we're dealing with appraisals right now, in addition to, things to look for. And, please don't anybody share this appraisal. This is one that came in on one of our listings that was just comical, in my opinion. So if you know the appraiser, don't tell them, but there was a lot of red flags that I saw right off the bat. And so I just kind of want to talk through, if as the listing agent, if you have an appraisal come in low, if you're the buyer's agent and appraisal comes in low, like things that we kind of do as general rule of thumb to address it. What we do on our team, and again, I would love to have anybody else's feedback, but I foresee that we're going to have a lot more appraisal issues this year than we've probably seen in the past. And, I've had my own, especially end of last year, it seemed, it was amazing to me how it was from one end of the spectrum to the other on the same house. And so just some little things to kind of be aware of, keep in mind. I don't know if you saw one of the leadership newsletters that came out. Are we live? Sorry, I'm just talking.
Yes, we are.
Okay,
There's
sorry.
only one other person in this. Your time.
Okay.
Hi, one other person.
If y'all saw the leadership bulletin come out from EXP, but if you always scroll down to the one that they send every Monday, it's got the best information from like a legal big standpoint. And one of the things they were talking about were these appraisal addendums that everybody's sending. So the crazy thing is some people don't even understand their own appraisal addendums, and that's what they're seeing.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's very important that you're a buyer's agent or a listing agent. Where did this appraisal addendum come from and who is it protecting? Because I've seen them as a listing agent where there's language in there that alludes to the fact that if the home doesn't, like, for instance, I had one, they went $30,000 over. They did a $25,000 appraisal addendum. And when I read the verbiage in the appraisal addendum, it alluded to the fact that in the event that it did not appraise, if there was a difference of more than $25,000, the seller would reduce to that. And I was
You were
like,
the buyer's agent?
I was the listing agent, and I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
I've seen some of those too.
You're already saying you're willing to pay 30,000 over, but your addendum says that you're really only willing to pay 25. So be very careful that I think some of these are being written by people that have no business writing them, and B, again, keep in mind of who you're protecting. So the first thing I want to do is start and see if there's any follow-up questions to how to read an appraisal, what to look for on an appraisal. Again, I know we got real deep last week, but it was good. I mean, those things I'd never even heard of.
question like the cost approach versus the.
I know I muddied the waters with that. It's just
Okay.
something I use, especially in new construction to, you know,
Why is it so?
shame an appraiser, for lack of a better word.
I know, and you had that instant program.
Right.
Like, I just didn't know why it's not.
The lenders never ever use it, right?
No, it doesn't weigh, it to the lenders, it has no weight. In a normal market, I do think it's important, especially if you're dealing with houses that are, you know, in real estate school, they taught us if you're dealing with a house that's, you know, 100 years old, you can't rebuild that house and have the same pieces that are in there for the same price. You know, these items are, you know, historical or whatever the word I'm looking for. So there's differences as far as that goes, but I think it's really important to note if it is on there these days, because some of the appraisers, the good ones, are taking into consideration the fact that lumber went up 24% last month. So if you appraise, you know, especially with us working in new construction subdivisions where we have the same house, same plan that has sold within 6 months of each other, there's a $40,000 spread. That's hard to make up. But, you know, I like to use that as a rebuttal to the buyers and the buyer's agent when they get mad because the house didn't appraise for what it's under contract for. I'm like, do you see this number down here? Do you think a builder can build houses for less than it costs? I mean, sell houses for less than it costs them to build it? So that's when I kind of use that rebuttal. Again, it's more or less a common sense kind of conversation. Come on, guys. I understand the appraisal says this, and I hate that the lender's only going to loan on this, but this is real. Like,
But why don't appraisers use that?
because the lenders don't take it into consideration. So a lot of them don't even put it if it's not required. And like he was saying, only certain lenders require them to use the cost approach. I feel like it's a good gauge, you know, for the banks to see, hey, I mean, again, they're not making emotional decisions as the seller when it's, you know, the lender. At the end of the day, they're trying to protect an asset, but I think it's a good gauge to see, okay, the house only appraised at 300, but the cost approach said it cost them 325 to build it. Obviously, there's a market change, but it doesn't change the fact that these are real numbers. But again, they don't bear any weight. I just use them more as a negotiation tactic when a buyer agent's like, well, you know, they're not gonna, okay, well, if you see the cost approach, we can't sell houses for cheaper than it costs to build them. So any other questions on generic, the appraisal itself? One of the biggest things I say, and we hinted on this a little bit last week, but if you're the listing agent and a buyer's agent, and it kind of blows my mind that I don't think all agents do this, but especially when the market was different than what it is now, you know, a buyer's agent would call a listing agent and say, hey, it didn't appraise, it only appraised for this. As a listing agent, do you always ask for a copy of the appraisal? I can't tell you how many times listing agents haven't challenged me on it when I tell them that. And it's kind of, I'm surprised a lot of times when I ask buyers agents for a copy of their appraisal, like, well, I don't know if I can get it. And I'm like, well, I don't know where you think we're going to start a conversation. If I don't see this in my hand, I can't take your word that this is what it is. And so that's, you know, first step, if you have an appraisal issue, is to ask for a copy. And I always ask the buyer's agent, did you go through this? You know, or is there anything you saw that concerns you? And no, again, no offense to buyer's agents, but a lot of times they don't. You know, I understand they're representing their buyer, but at the same time, you want to make sure you're negotiating accuracy. So I've had several of them get sent to me, and I was like, well, this is only marked as a 3-bedroom. This is a 4-bedroom home. Well, this, you know, I've caught several mistakes in my opinion. Like I said, that one appraisal I had that said that the property was, you know, far out there. It was 1 mile from 40. And, you know, then I had to go back to the buyer's agent and said, did you see this? Did you talk to the lender or the appraisal about the fact that this lender, seller's office address is, drove 48 minutes to get to this property? I'm sure it did seem far out to him, but so always look for discrepancies, because I feel like if you're going to try to challenge an appraisal, whether it's with the lender or the buyer's agent, you need to make sure all the information is accurate. So that's the first thing I do when I get a buyer's agent notifying me that an appraisal is low, is I ask for a copy of it, and then I'm going to go through and kind of do my own assessment. So has anybody ever had to challenge an appraisal before?
Yes.
So I had a lot of people, I've talked to, especially newer agents. So some of this is going to be redundant, but if you're a new agent, please know that you can ask to challenge an appraisal. If the buyer's agent chooses not to even ask, then in my opinion, there should be no negotiations. If they're not willing to try, we both have to try to meet somewhere along the lines with this. And then I've seen times where the lenders would not agree to have the appraisal challenged. In that situation, again, I kind of go back to the buyer's agent. In this market as a seller, we have a little more leverage to say, well, we've got this much in due diligence money. You sign an appraisal waiver or whatever. I think we need to do all we can to try to make this gap up if it's going to be a detriment to your buyer. So we did have an instance last year. Again, they paid $30,000 over and the appraisal came in $60,000 below my list price. Now, it was a very unique property, very unique. It was an older home in town. But I worked really hard to combat. I felt like I knew solid where it was. We had multiple offers. We went under contract within the first 3 days. And these people just loved the house. And so that was one of those first appraisal addendum conversations where they're like, well, the appraisal addendum says that we'll pay, up to $25,000 over, and then the seller has to do this. And I was like, first of all, that's not how it reads. Second of all, I don't care what your appraisal addendum says. It's not worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, it's not.
All of our attorney friends will tell you they don't matter, unfortunately.
So why do a lot of agents demand them when they know they have multiple offers?
Well,
Is it just to get the proof of funds to say that? Hey,
a little bit. I think it's a good education tool, because then if somebody is telling me that they're willing to pay $30,000 over, and I'm going, okay, put it in writing. I feel like it makes it a little bit more legitimate. Not only that, but now I have the reason to request an additional proof of funds that say you have this. Before things got so crazy with so much due diligence, I do feel like people were fudging and saying, oh yeah, we'll go 10,000 over. But then when it came down to it, you look at it and it's like, these people are getting a USDA loan and they're asking for seller paid closing costs. How are they going to have $10,000 to put down if it, so we had to really pick apart these offers that were coming in during the beginning of multiple offers.
I actually was sent an appraisal addendum that I think is more of like a disclosure that I've been using. I'm putting it up on the screen, but it says the buyer understands and acknowledges that the contract price agreed upon by the parties may be in excess of price value. The buyer represents the buyer has sufficient funds to fund the difference out of pocket if the property does not appraise. And the buyer understands and acknowledges the seller has no expectation of reducing the contract price. This one's my favorite.
Yeah, no, I like this one too. And I think this one came from EXP.
Someone from Remax sent it to me and I was just like, okay.
Gotcha. I thought that was one we saw in Freedom Builders, but no, I agree. And sometimes people want to see a certain percentage. If there's an appraisal gap of this percentage or of this amount. Again, I don't love that. And I'll tell you why with this appraisal. Go ahead.
I also, as a listing agent, want this signed because it tells me they've at least had that conversation.
Right.
That buyer's agent has had the conversation and set the expectation with the buyer.
It's
Because at the end of the day, it does not matter. None of these make any kind of difference. But at least I know if they've signed it, that they have had a conversation, that this may happen.
I have used this exact addendum and had somebody come back to me and said it has an appraisal, we want to try and renegotiate. And he came back to me and said, they don't have the sufficient funds. And at that point, I had him backed against the corner where I said, okay, so you lied. You lied to me. And that's something that I feel like is a little bit, gives you some ground.
The only thing that he could say though is that, well, we had, like, it depends on how far off was it, did it appraise for under contract, under
Oh, no,
asking
no,
price?
it appraised
Okay.
for,
More than asking price,
Yeah,
but
more than
not
asking
there,
price,
not
yeah.
contract value.
so I feel like this is clear. It doesn't give any wiggle room. And if you're trying to come in and say, I had an agent call me earlier this week and say, my people want to go over, I feel like the house is underpriced, add comps to support it. What can we do? And I feel like that's when the percentage one can kind of come into play, right?
Well,
Can we share that?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I can share this.
so, and another thing, like I said, I feel like this gives you more leverage to say, okay, you understand. So can I get proof of funds if your pre-qualification letter does not, go above and beyond the
It's a
offer?
CYA. Just say you did your part.
But again, some buyers think that this holds the seller. Again, it's about how it's written. So Any other questions on kind of like the process? If you get an appraisal that's low or that's off? And again, especially if you're new, feel free to ask
Isn't
because
there so many days you have to fight it with the lender? I know VAs, they have it with so many hours. I had a bad one with the VA that I was the buyer agent on it and fought with the listing agent, but the lender didn't send it to me in time, so I was past my 48-hour window.
Mhm.
So I had to go higher up,
Yep.
but they reevaluated it and I actually did win some.
so that's what's called Tidewater. If you're
Yes.
doing a VA loan, what happens is they essentially kind of stop everything and give both parties 48 hours to argue the appraisal. And I think a lot of that has to come into play with the fact that if it is a VA loan, they get their earnest money back if it doesn't appraise, and there's some other stipulations regarding that. And so I think it's kind of like, hey, we're going to do everything we can. It is very hard to get a VA appraisal budge, so great job to you. There is a form that they typically send you. Not all lenders have that. I have like a generic one I think I found from somewhere that essentially looks like, you know, you're comparing the subject properties here, and they give you the opportunity to dispute the appraisal to be reconsidered. But yeah, that's the only one that I know that there's a certain time frame is when it's VA. Otherwise, I think it's very
When
lender
does that time frame
specific.
start? When does that clock tick? That is when the lender received it.
Well, typically, yeah, the lender's supposed to notify you very quickly because they'll say, I mean, it stops everything. They've called Tidewater. Everything stops for 48 hours on this loan, pretty
Because I'm
much.
in the middle of one and he apparently already called Tidewater, but
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know it, but he is still willing to make an adjustment. So can he do that? I guess he can.
Mhm.
He's just agreeing to go outside this frame.
Again,
I don't think we're gonna find it anyway, but
yeah, the hard part of this is it all comes down to the lender. If you're working, I mean, it all comes down to the appraiser. If you're working with a good appraiser, they're going to be helpful. If you're working with a bad appraiser, they're going to be awful. So going back to this one that I was, not this one, but the one I was talking about, that came in $60,000 low. So I went back to the buyer's agent, asked to challenge it. So I sent in comps, she sent in comps, we were both on the same page. Appraiser held on to it for a week and then came back and said, yeah, I'm not changing my appraisal. So then they ordered a second appraisal. That appraiser never came. He forgot, literally sat on his desk for another week and never came. So third appraisal comes, kid you not, it is ordered, performed, and completed in the same day and came in at contract price, which was a $90,000 spread.
wow. So like he bans.
It is pencil whipped, yeah. So if that doesn't tell you, like, it's all about the appraiser right now. And but that was a good learning experience for me I had to be very proactive and very on top of it. At this point, I'm contacting the lender. When was this ordered? Luckily, unluckily, I had a seller who's also one of those that wakes up every morning like, what are we doing today? What is happening now? And so I'm like, I'm calling the lender to find out when it's been ordered. And it was just a disaster because everything had taken so long and so many balls had been dropped. But at the end of the day, it all worked out. But again, it took me and the buyer's agent being on the same page with the buyer that they really want this home and that they were willing to change lenders if we had to. So that's the second thing. I've had that multiple times where we have convinced a buyer to change lenders if the appraiser is not willing to change their appraisal. Now you have to be tricky with that because you can add extra time, especially with the way they're delayed. But we had a situation in new construction that it seemed like it was this one appraiser, and gosh knows, I don't know why he kept coming out to our subdivision, but we got him. And it was being ordered by one of our preferred lenders, and you just couldn't get him to understand, like, there was a lot of unique things in the home. It was a unique subdivision, and he just wasn't given the values that we felt like were necessary. And he had one that was $26,000 low on new construction. And again, I'm looking at the cost approach, like, this is idiotic. Like, the cost approach is $40,000 higher than your appraisal. So we ended up having the buyer switch loans, go to another lender, and close it 9 days later with another lender. So you got to be careful with that. But I will say, especially in this market, use your pool as a listing agent to say, hey, if you're not willing to, because I don't want an appraiser to lie. I don't want an appraiser to do wrong, but also don't make this harder than it has to be. You know, it used to be insane when they couldn't get it within like 500 to 1,000. I mean, we had one just last year. It was a veteran, had no more money to put down. Appraiser got sent out. It was low. Asked for another appraiser. They sent the same appraiser came in with the same value.
Okay, you lowered it.
Oh yeah, he lowered it.
Oh,
And it was one of those where like the veteran literally didn't have it and it was $1,500. So it's kind of like, really, you couldn't find $1,500 for this disabled veteran in a neighborhood that we're building more houses and you see the prices are going up. Every time we list one, it goes up $15,000. You couldn't find 1,500. So as the agents, we went in together and ate it for him because he didn't have it, you know? And I know we're not dealing with that a lot, but there are still buyers out there that are putting homes under contract that don't have as much to lose as others. So anyway, don't get me on that soapbox, but that's one of those where I went to the lender again and I said, he needs to come off your appraisal list if we're going to continue using you. And again, I know that's rude. We shouldn't have that pool. They don't have that pool and this does not need to go in public, but
You said that to the camera.
I know. But at the same time, I do think, you know, they're, again, like I've said 100 times.
It's like you said, though, you don't want them to cheat, but there are
Yeah.
some appraisers who don't even try.
Right.
They do one exercise, they don't use their brains to say, can this be worth this amount of money? And that's just lazy. And so there's nothing wrong with us, in my opinion, saying we don't want to work with lazy people.
Well, and some of it comes down to opinion, and that's the frustrating thing that I think it's so hard to explain to your buyers and your sellers. Do you realize this is someone else's opinion? And there's data, but there's no science here. This is an opinion. And, you know, the fact that one appraiser could appraise a storage building at $5,000 and another one say, I give it no value because you could pick it up and move it. Like I wish there were more lines. And I'll be honest, appraisers are underpaid. You couldn't pay me to do it. So,
There's no standard.
and especially in North Carolina, I mean, they are very undervalued compared to other states. I mean, most of them start at $750 in other states. So I get where our guys are frustrated and it's become like quantity over quality. I feel like unless you get a good one like Van or, you know, some of the other ones who still just care. They, you know, some of the other things that I like to look for on the appraisals. First thing I do is I go pull up the subject properties that they have used, obviously, and I start going, did I use this or would I have used this? And then I don't even start with the adjustments. I start with what comps did they use? And off the bat, can I find some that are better? Especially, you know, this one's kind of unique where it's at, the acreage, the pool, things like that. Again, this is one of those where a pool came into play and it was not given hardly any of the value that it deserves, which is understandable. Van just told us again, there's no rule against that, but it's like you said, we're getting more value from appraisers, I think, than we ever have before, but they're still not getting what we know the market is bringing for a pool. So
I'm sorry, I wasn't
You're
here
good.
last week. So what did he say about?
half the cost, 20, well,
He said 25 to 35% of the cost to install, but he said that what really brings you value is the decking and landscaping.
For your above ground.
For its
Value.
value. Yeah, there's no above
We
ground.
said decking for above ground.
No, I mean,
if it
like
was
the concrete
max.
decking is what he was saying.
Oh, is it concrete?
Yeah.
well, okay, so he said like he was talking about how pools are getting max daddied out now, waterfalls and things like that. He said about for an in-ground pool, about 25 to 30% of what it costs to install, or what it would cost to install it. We know that pools have gone up too right now. And then if it was an above ground, he does not give value unless it's got extensive decking and landscaping and things like that, because otherwise it can be picked up and moved. And even then, I think that was like very minimal, like maybe 10%.
Yeah, I think he was saying like $1,000 or $2,000 for it, if not.
Yeah.
Did he say max 5 or 9?
I feel like it's like $500.
It was very low.
Not to worry about, tell people nothing.
That's what he was saying about it.
25K, but I think that's for in-ground, but for above ground, he didn't really give a price.
Yeah, he said he would put it on the higher end. If it had the nice decking and the landscaping and things like that, he would kind of put it on the higher end of his comps. So again, this one was a little bit unique. So first I'm going to check out these and say, okay, I could understand why they use this. I mean, there's one on here. As soon as I looked at it, I was like, I can't even believe they went in that subdivision. I mean, that subdivision's almost completely rentals at this point. I remember, you know, just knowing your areas and things like that. I was like, I can't believe he used this subdivision. This house has nothing in common with the actual house that he was
Which
appraising.
page are you looking at? So
I'm on the comparables.
comparables, right?
So first you're going to look at your subject and make sure everything is correct. And then again, the quality of construction, I think, is something that is so interesting. And I never even knew about it until we had one that came in with a Q5 last week or last year, saying that they wouldn't even loan on it because the quality was so bad. So if you go here, this one has quality of construction Q3. And that means that it's kind of middle of the road as far as quality of construction and everything else. And I feel like that's not, I think it's at least a 2. I mean, it's not brand new. Brand new is going to be a 1. But in my opinion, it was well maintained. It should have been at least a 2. And so that just kind of flagged me right there. Like there was something about this house he didn't like. And then he went and looked at middle to bottom of the barrel. I mean, we all know when we are doing a CMA, put yourself in that same headspace. Okay, I see this house. I really like this house. It's got a great floor plan. It lives well. Their furniture is nice. I mean, I hate to say that, but how does it feel and how does it live? And I'm going to look at other houses that are,
Has a shadow too.
yes, are of the same kind of caliber but then you've gone to other ones where it's kind of like, oh my gosh, there's crayons everywhere. The carpet is nasty, so when I'm comparing it, I'm not comparing it to the cream of the crop. I'm comparing it there. So I kind of look at that queue to see what did they think about my house, my listing, and figure out if I feel like they're on board or, what was it they are judging it by, I reckon. So here, of course, he does have all C3s, Q3. So that's one of the first things I look at. Like if you have mine at a Q2 and everything else over here is a Q3, where's the adjustment and how much was the adjustment for that? So, and then of course, I want to make sure the square footage is right. We talked about it last week. I mean, when I had my old house, we finished the 2nd floor and did a cash out refinance to pay for it. The appraiser came and never even measured the 2nd floor. So the appraisal came in and it was like $30,000 less than just about what we paid for it. And I was like, what in the world? And I looked, I was like, the whole reason you were there was to include this because the 2nd floor was unfinished. We finished the 2nd floor. He never even measured or included the 2nd floor finished square footage, which was why he was there.
So what if the appraisal, the measurements are off, but not by much, like 60 square feet or something like that? You can't really do anything about it, can you?
Well, it depends on how much difference does it make. So we had one in Benson 2 years ago before things went so crazy, but it was they were starting to get there, 1,200 square foot ranch. And he was like 80 square feet off, where you're doing price per square foot and you're only working with 1,200 square feet. That's a big difference.
But how do you prove that what you have, the measurements that because let's say I have a buyer,
Mhm.
how do I prove that the measurements that they had ordered, how is the appraiser going to believe that my measurements are right? I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, in this situation, I called and I said, I know 80 square feet doesn't seem like a big deal, but it did. If you're now comparing, I had it at, for instance, let's just say I had it at 1,280 square feet and he only counted at 1,200. Well, now he's including houses that are 1,150 square feet, whereas I probably wouldn't have included those before. I'd have gone closer to 1,300. And I called and they're like, well, we didn't measure.
Oh,
Appraiser never measured the house and refused to change it. And I provided him, we have all of our houses professionally measured. Here are my measurements, show me yours and let's compare. It's as easy as that, in my opinion. You've got the sketch right here. So if their square footage is different, I'm gonna look, I didn't include all of that in this one, but the sketch should be here. So I'm gonna look and try to figure out, is there an area he missed? Again, anytime you can give them some type of discrepancy, I feel like, okay, now you're gonna have to go back and evaluate and potentially change your numbers, because that I just showed you something was wrong. So what else may have been wrong?
I'm sorry, but you said he didn't measure?
Mm-mm.
Isn't that your job as an appraiser?
And the lender, it was so funny because it was Kevin. Oh, he was livid. It was my listing. So he was the buyer's lender and he was livid about it. But it made a difference. It was $2,500 low, and they gave something for condition because the yard was wooded. Like everything that I felt like was marketable about this house, they did adjustments negatively for. So it was one of those fun ones where, again, I sharpened my pencil on how to negotiate and argue with an appraiser. And again, I'm not trying to tell somebody how to do their job, but I feel like you're kind of telling me how I did mine, and we will have to discuss. I don't get stuck in too much of the weeds. I hit the high points. If you weren't here last week, the biggest, one of the other things we talked about was the lot size. So, you know, if it's another lot in a subdivision, most of the times appraiser is gonna say a lot is a lot is a lot. If it's, you know, 0.8, you know, to me, I'm sure we've all had those sellers be like, my lot was, you know, 0.8 acres, theirs was only 0.67. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Nobody knows the difference. But if there is a substantial difference, like on this one, which I'm very excited to get your opinion on, they compared it to one that was on a golf course and had a golf course view. So we have a really nice, cleared, beautiful lot, very well landscaped, you know, in my opinion, was really nice to have. Well, one of the comparables they used was on a golf course. What would you guys think? If you were the listing agent and your house was on a golf course, how much value would you give to having a golf course view? Don't cheat and look ahead.
I'm told that it's more if you have a golf course view, but.
How much?
That depends if you wanna look at a golf course, that'd be a negative to me.
Same. I don't want golf balls flying towards my house. I don't want to see people in my backyard.
No, I don't.
So to me, you know, when I'm on a listing appointment as a listing agent, yes, I'm going to give it some view, because if you're looking at buyers that are moving into a golf course community, it's probably because they like golf.
Yeah.
And so I'll give it some value versus, you know, somebody who backs up to a fairway versus somebody who backs up to the cart path where there's just, you know, golf carts in your backyard every day. So I will do some adjustments there.
But only if you're in a golf community, why would you compare this house to one that's in a golf community?
That was one of my questions too.
Because they'll tell you, they'll tell you if it's in a full community or not, but we can't use it in a full community, it doesn't.
That is, again, one of the reasons I wanted to argue this appraisal. So he gave the comparable property $35,000 worth of value for having a golf course view.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't that sound just ridiculous?
That's a huge adjustment just for one item to begin with.
So this is my first red flag. I go
Where
straight
was
to the
this at?
bottom two. It's in the middle.
Which one is that?
So they're,
Yeah, I go straight to the bottom two. They adjusted this comparable $61,000. Like, we weren't even in the same ballpark.
That is too big of an adjustment.
Way too big of an adjustment.
I want my adjustments to be very, very minimal.
I thought it had to be under around 10% or 15%.
I mean, like I said, when I saw that, and the interesting part was we were dealing with a buyer's agent who was not as well educated as they should have been and did not understand the appraisal process, nor the appraisal addendum. So we'll get into that in just a second too. So, and again, this is not talking bad about anybody. I just don't want you guys to be that person that doesn't understand when I'm telling you that this should not have been used as a comparable. They're like, well, you know, they're not willing to do anything about it. I'm like, okay, well, we're not willing to negotiate off of something that makes no sense. Go ahead.
That's great. Okay, so, showed the property last week. There's the tower, there was a Duke, E-frame on right across their property. You can look out the back window, and you can see this enormous tower in the power lines. And this home was priced higher than the last home that sold in that area. I just told you to do the research. How close do you want? Do you really want to have that tower in your backyard? And I was just wondering, how did they come up with this value for this particular lot? Because, I mean, it's encumbered by just not a simple easement. I mean, this is a utility easement, and you can, it's not below ground, it's above ground, and site for storage or something. And I just told them, I said, well, listen, you know, so your research, just think that this could be a problem in drug sale.
That's very good. So in this market, it's not an issue. It was a huge issue 6-7 years ago. I mean, if you back up to power lines, I had the Duke website pulled up. I had pamphlets on the counter that said you're not going to grow a third arm because you live beside power lines. Like, we tried to, you know, over educate the buyer that yes, it's a deterrent. Yes, it's an eyesore. It was definitely a big, in my opinion, deterrent. Again, it depends on the market. I would think an appraiser would do an adjustment, a negative adjustment for there being a power line easement, if nothing else, just because it's taking away from the usable
Oh, yeah.
property.
And you can sit in your living room and look out the window.
Mhm.
Now, are you considering just the high transmission ones to be a negative or all power line?
I would say mainly your high transmission, like above that you can see. I mean, I've had radio towers in the backyard of the property that it was an eyesore and we couldn't sell the house. You know what I mean? It made it harder to sell the house. Obviously, in this market, it's substantially different, but I think as a buyer's agent, it does, I would say that just keep this in the back of your mind. Olivia said, if things aren't like this,
Write it
yeah,
down and sign it, but, you know.
it was on the RPD.
Coming back for me over this.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that, if we're not in this market and they go to sell 10 years from now, just know that's something that it may not be in our favor.
And what was my point is that it was listed higher than a home that's sold, I say, well, a home on a better lot in that neighborhood is sold over us.
Mhm.
So their list price is over that, so I saw that.
Did it go into contract? Did it go into contract?
I'm sure it did. Because they sort of sweat it off, but I think.
Yeah.
They have problems selling, so I drove that point home, so they decided.
Yeah.
I don't think I want that problem.
I don't want to look at that. Yeah.
That tower in my backyard, so.
So again, this is one of those where I was, really frustrated. The difference, I mean, there's a $42,000 adjustment for the square footage. Like, this guy was just reaching and we gave him 2 better comps than this one. And he refused to use them. He refused to make any adjustments. So again, this is not to say and dog this appraiser and shame him, but when the buyer's agent's trying to argue with me, I'm going, no. You and I both know, I've never given $35,000 worth of a value to a golf course view on anything. I mean, I don't know that you might probably get $35,000 worth of value as ocean view, but that's about, all I could think of that should bring that amount. And so to me, like I said, it raised a lot of red flags and made us stand firm in our negotiations. There was one other thing I wanted to mention.
April, do you know if there's, the quality, if they're all the same quality, why would they deduct?
For condition,
Yeah, like they're all Q4, but there's a $20,000 deduction on the most expensive listing for quality when they're all Q4s.
that is a great question.
Where's that one at?
It's not on there, it's
Oh.
on one of mine.
Oh, gotcha. I was like,
It doesn't make sense.
have to turn this guy in if he's got that too.
Q4 He's got Q4 on all the subject and the 3 comps, but on the highest sold, he deducted $20,000 on the same line as the Q4.
I don't know, that's something I rebut, especially because they didn't go in these comps. They have not stepped foot in them. So they're basing their opinion off of a picture.
Yes.
Was it a high
Nobody in here better be using cell phone pictures
So
on
it's
their.
the same quality, you shouldn't deduct anyway.
Mm-mm.
Makes you wonder again.
So again, this is why it's so important as a listing agent, because, buyers agents and buyers are armed with this appraisal addendum now that they think entitles them to things that are not factual. So again, I think if you come back and you're very educated on the issues in this appraisal, I think you have a bigger leg to stand on. And I think any lender and buyer and buyer's agent would want to be like, why aren't you willing to adjust this? This doesn't make sense if somebody else is bringing these up. So do you want to hear the fun part of this one?
Yes.
Guess how much it went under contract for? $50,000 above asking.
Ooh,
Guess how much due diligence the money there was? $50,000. Guess what the appraisal addendum said?
$50,000.
$25,000. Guess how much this appraisal was off? $50,000. But it did, like, I could see what, we all know that sometimes the appraiser looks at the contract and goes, okay, the contract price is this, there's this many in seller, this much in seller pay closing costs, there's this much in this. I can tell you all this now because it's close. There's this much in seller pay closing costs, this much in this. And okay, then so I know the number needs to be here.
I hate that.
I hate that too.
I wish they didn't get any of the contract information.
And it was a
Although, and sometimes it helps us.
It
So I
does.
don't wish that, because I think there are appraisers out there who start at that number and say, I gotta find it. Because there are appraisers we
But
never
if you
ever.
tell
have
me a
issues.
number, like this is my magic number you need to be at, I can make that number happen.
Right. They have a biased opinion of what people are expecting. But at the same time, to me, this was just obvious. I was like, really, dude? I mean, because essentially he was trying to protect the buyer's additional $25,000. Like he wasn't willing to go here. And because of this appraisal addendum that he's now privy to, like I said, I looked at it, once I looked at the adjustments and I was like, this is crap. And then I looked at the contract, I was like, that was just pure T obvious.
So did you fight it and win, or did they walk?
No, we fought it and he wouldn't change it. And so this is where it gets funny from the buyer agent standpoint. Again, please don't anybody go look up this property and see. But the buyer and the buyer agent were convinced, because they had this appraisal addendum that said that, you know, they would pay up to $25,000 over the appraised value, that the seller automatically had to calm down 25. And the appraisal addendum clearly said, regardless of what the appraisal, I mean, like, I should have printed that off so you could read the verbiage. It was clear that the seller was under no obligation to change the contract price based on an appraisal. But he was like, well, my buyers and I are going to discuss what they want to do. And I was like, what do you mean what you want to do? We're $50,000 off and you have $50,000 in due diligence. Well, we'll get back to you.
So-
Okay, hold on. Wait, what are you gonna get back to us on?
Were
We're
they trying to
literally.
work with you to fight the appraisal, or were they against you the whole time?
In the beginning, they were against us. We kind of rebutted it, and then the lender said they weren't going to order another appraisal, and then it was going to be a timing situation of getting another appraisal, even if we did. And so then the fun part was, and this is the other life lessons that I really wanted to get across today. He said, well, we need a decision by Friday because the due diligence period is up at 5 o'clock on Friday.
Was there earnest money?
Ask me how much earnest money there was. Zero. Guess what that mattered? Nothing. This buyer, we could not get the buyer's agent to understand that. We could not get, I mean, and it was like, we are literally sending an email like, I think you need to be having a conversation. We are literally talking about the same money, the same, nothing different, like
Nothing changes.
no risk, no reward. There's no, and as of 5 o'clock on Friday, they still had not sent a termination. They had not sent an agreement to amend. They had not sent anything. So luckily my sellers were like, we don't want to go back on the market. We'll make this work. But it took us like 4 days of pulling our teeth to get this buyer agent on the same page that we were negotiating nothing. 4 days, delayed closing. I mean, we finally got to, if we do not close today, thank you for your buyer's $50,000.
So did they end up paying the 50,000?
I'm very.
Yeah, ended up closing at contract. Like we literally just spent 5 days arguing over nothing because we could not. And he was like, well, I'm going to, they're still discussing. I'm like, what are they discussing? Do they want to lose $50,000 or do they want to lose $50,000?
I think they were mad at their agent and just figured we're gonna wait to see who cracks, and they crack first.
I feel like we need a due diligence disclosure saying that it is not.
Well, I'm ready to start throwing some earnest money out there and start requesting some earnest money because it does that without any earnest money, they can terminate the day of closing, and that's not good for anybody.
Mm-mm.
Like,
Well, when they have
there's zero risk.
$200,000 in due diligence, it doesn't matter.
But
With
does it,
earnest
but
money,
does
it's
it,
still
what if
terminated.
what if your sellers have moved out of the house and we still don't have this stuff worked out and now they've got, it doesn't really matter, you got $200,000 in your pocket and you're pretty sure that they're not gonna go anywhere, but still, I feel like it would at least, if there's a little more at stake, it would make them make that decision sooner than the closing. That's all I'm getting at, is I would like to see a little bit of earnest money so that that date does mean something. So I don't even put a date in there anymore. I put NA, due diligence date.
Well, not only that, I feel like it puts a sense of urgency on everybody.
Right,
You
that's
know,
what I mean,
I
yeah.
had one this week. It was on a lot. I mean, it was $500 of due diligence and earnest because he had to do perk tests. Well, I had to put fire under everybody to move quickly to make sure title was clear and this was clear during due diligence. Even though we only had $500 at risk, why are we going to lose $500? I need all my information up front. Whereas, I mean, we've seen it several times. And again, it's been an education process for the buyer's agent. It was, we had one that was $100,000 in due diligence. And he was like, well, due diligence is up on Friday. If this seller's not going to make this repair. And I mean, it was to the tune of cleaning a bathroom and putting in a air vent from Lowe's. then the buyers are gonna walk. I'm like, walk, we have $100,000 back. We will put it back. I mean, they just wanted to argue to the death. And I finally had to say, I need you to understand. We are in the 11th hour right now. If you do not go to closing tomorrow, my sellers are taking your $100,000 to bank, like done. So make sure I'm with you. I do want to see earnest money coming back because I've got one right now and you could tell the lender has moved with no sense of
Yeah,
urgency.
it's just nobody's moving, myself included, if I have a buyer's agent, I'm like, I don't care when due diligence is, if we get.
We don't care when we get the appraisal
Yeah.
because there's nothing else to lose.
Yeah, I don't care because it doesn't matter, and I feel like that is not good for anybody.
Mm-mm.
Because I still care.
Even if I didn't have earnest money, I still care, I still follow those dates.
Well, no,
I've
I
been
mean,
a buyer agent
Still,
for 5
see,
years
that
and then
date
switched over
is
to my
like-
brain.
That date is absolutely
But
not.
I still worry about my sellers, I know.
Yeah.
There's no need to put it in there. You shouldn't even
I
have
agree
it in there
with you.
Yeah.
because there's no.
But I still stand.
No, as I say, we do. It's not that we don't care. She's not saying that. We care, obviously, but I feel like if, it kind of, we don't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
why
not
aren't we
gonna go
moving?
and ask you, are you sending a due diligence repair fund?
Oh,
That I
yeah,
could care
never.
less about,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna make sure you're hitting your dates and I've got my.
Right. But I think earnest money coming back would be a good thing in this market, just to hold, like I said, I've got one right now. And especially now that they only have 7 days to get out of the contract, or to where the sellers can terminate. I feel like it'll keep people in their
Game changer right
Mhm.
there.
P's and Q's. So, and that's the other thing we're finding and arguing. I'm not trying to go into a rabbit hole. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page and, we're all dealing with different things is, all these agents that want us in agreement to amend to change the closing date by 2 days. I'm like, we're still within the time period on the contract. I'm not having my seller sign something that automatically either gives your buyer another 7 days or we have to check the 4-day box because no buyer agent automatically sends it over with 4-day box checked. I mean, it's one of those, are you paying attention? Is somebody, looking at that? So, for my seller's sake, I don't ever sign an agreement to amend and they're like, their lender's requiring it. I'm like, no, they're not. We are still within our.
They try, I'm
They
telling
do
you,
try.
they do try.
In my case, the lender was hounding me for.
Mhm.
That's what I'm saying, the lenders are saying we have to have it. For their paperwork, they have to have an amendment stating the actual closing date.
Yeah.
Is what I've had.
Yeah, and I've seen it too, but then they need to create a different amendment that does not give, because our amendment gives an additional 7 calendar days unless you check the 4-day box.
So when you're looking at appraisal, what we should focus on is this whole comparable subject kind of area there. And when you have a discrepancy, do you reach out to the appraiser? Do you reach out to the buyer agent who calls the lender?
Yeah, so you go chain command, buyer agent, call the lender. Sometimes, most of the time they'll say you're not allowed to speak to the appraiser. Sometimes they'll say the appraiser will reach out to you, or kind of like in Tidewater, they'll say, send me your comps and your adjustments. And so, and when it's not Tidewater, I don't do the whole spreadsheet, things like that, because I feel like I'm trying to do their job, and I'm not. I'm just gonna say, I have concerns with their adjustments on this, this, and this. I have found these 2 comps that I used when I was listing the property that I feel were more comparable. In this market, I would have put when we did in this market, I've never seen an adjustment of $35,000 for a golf course view. I'm not sure why this home was even used, especially when I can provide you with these 2 better comparables. So, and sometimes they're willing to look at it and change it, and sometimes they're not. So again, though, I feel like if I have shown this to the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent was working on the same page or in the same book as us, then I would feel like the buyer's agent should then go to the buyer and the lender and say, we need to order another appraisal. These are obvious things. If he's not willing to make a change, we need to change something on our end.
I just realized what golf course that was, and I'm like, but that's not even a nice golf course. I'm over here smiling to my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Do some lenders not allow you to reorder the appraisal, and that's why you would go on to a different lender?
Mhm. So it's the buyer has got to agree as well, because they're going to pay for a second appraisal. Sometimes the lender's willing to eat it, especially if we're like, guys, this is a terrible appraisal. If it was a good lender, they should be like, okay, we're going to order another one because it's detrimental to this deal. Oh, wait, there was one more thing that made this even better. Guess how much they were financing?
$150,000.
No, like 60%. So it didn't even matter. It did not matter. It's not like they needed all 80%. They were only financing like 60%. So, I mean, it was literally like, I wanted to go to the buyer's agent's office and shake him and say, we're arguing for nothing.
So it didn't even matter.
It didn't even matter at the end of the day. There was still, I mean, they were only, yeah, they were financing $350 and the contract price was like $485. $50,000 made no difference in any direction.
Do you argue if they have the 3 here and they don't have the 2 additional in the back that they kind of can, like, I feel like they didn't pull enough comps to compare?
I mean, like I said, in my opinion, you come at it like a listing agent. Hey, I did my homework. I put a value on this house. And not only that, but the buyer saw this much value in it. I don't understand why you can't see it. And again, we know some stuff is going way over asking more than it's worth, and there's nothing we can do about it. But at the same time, I at least want to do my due diligence as a listing agent and get, give my seller as much leverage as possible to get what they truly deserve. Y'all seeing a bunch of appraisals coming low?
No, I've been sending all my comps to them ahead of time saying, that's not be your job, but.
I do like it
And they
when,
do say, thank you, I'm like, you can use it or not use it, but this is where I came up with my numbers.
right.
And then some say yes, and some no, but.
Mhm. And that's a very good point. I mean, I feel like back in the day, we used to go to the house and leave our appraisals on the counter. I mean, our market analysis on the counter, so they'd see it when they went through because we're not allowed to, we weren't allowed to contact them.
They're not looking at them.
Yeah.
They're not even going in.
Some of them are. Now, some of our good ones around here, I mean, I really think the world of them because they'll call and they'll say, hey, I'm having trouble. Can you tell me, I know you've done this, this, and this in this neighborhood, especially if it's in a neighborhood that you work a lot. Because just like we talked about last week, especially if they're not familiar with this area, for instance, Broadmoor West is a great example. If you pull comps in Broadmoor West right now, you better know what section you're in. It's not even about West or Broadmoor. You need to go what section, because they changed the covenants throughout the, when the downturn happened, and you have sections of Broadmoor West that are all brick. You have sections of Broadmoor West that are 3 sides. And then, the way I tell people, if you want to know when you stop, the curb and gutter stops at Broadmoor West and it goes to ditches in Broadmoor. And so when you pull them up, they can seem very comparable because it's like, okay, 3 sides hardy plank, this one has stone, this one has this. But if you truly look at it, they're not comparable at all. So, I mean, it's different phases and sections of that neighborhood. So, when I pull comps there, I'm looking at, okay, if, for instance, like I'm comping our new construction right now in Avocet, I'm only looking at this phase of Broadmoor West that is on 3 streets. I don't care even if it is new construction. Right this way is Mungo Homes. That's not the same level of construction as what we're selling. They're just 3 sides hardy and 1 side brick. Ours is all brick. So, not all appraisers know to not just throw everything in there that looks like it fits.
That was one of the questions I asked, because I live right on the edge of my neighborhood where it's abutting a new neighborhood. It's different quality. And he said that they do adjust for that.
And a good appraiser that knows the area will. But again, you get those from North Raleigh and Wake Forest and everywhere else, and they have,
Realize it's a different neighborhood.
yeah. Yep, no idea. Any other questions? Any questions online? Again, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on here.
Just Ursula. Ursula, do you have any questions?
I don't. Thank you, though.
Like that was good.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Just opinion, because I.
Are we done with that?
I just have a quick question. Are you guys, the appraiser that I've been asking y'all about, he also put in there that standard